Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to our lunchtime devotion. And today we come into a passage on the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 22, which I will share on. This is on Paul's defense. Okay, Paul made a total of 5 defenses in the book of Acts, which was recorded by Dr. Luke. And this is the first one. And the things that recorded there is actually we have gone through most of it when we did earlier part of the book of Acts. Okay, so yesterday, Hui Sing took us through. Our story comes to a point now that Paul has landed in Jerusalem. That we did Acts 21. And then he met up with the leaders and so on. And he went into the temple. People presumed that there was earlier here, he was seen with a guy called Trophimus, the Ephesian, and people thought that he had brought this Gentile into the temple. And so there was a big riot. And the big riot became so terrible that the commander could come out and arrested him. And then he asked to speak to the crowd. We stopped at verse 39 of chapter 21 yesterday. We said, Paul answered, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Please let me speak to the people. And that was where we stopped yesterday. Okay, today we will start from verse 40 of chapter 21 and all the way to verse 29 of Acts chapter 22. Dive right into it. After receiving the commander's permission, that means when he asked in verse 39 whether can please let me speak, so respectful, please let me speak to the people, and he gave him permission. So Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the crowd. Okay, and when they were all silent, he said to them in Aramaic. Okay, Aramaic is a common language of the Jews. Okay, Hebrew is more high class, but Aramaic is the common Jewish people in Palestine speak at that time. Whereas the Romans will speak Greek, non-Jews will speak Greek. So Paul chose to speak to the people in Aramaic. There's the established contact. But before we go on to the rest of his defense, I would like to share screen to show us what was the background of this. Here, he said he stood on the steps. What you are seeing on the screen is Herod's temple. And Herod's temple, is stated here, is renovated by the King Herod, is about 20 to 19 BC. And then it only completed about AD 62 to 64. And then when it conquered by Rome, it was totally destroyed by AD 70. So when we read in the New Testament, during the life of Jesus and the early church, when we were to read about the temple, it actually is this temple we are talking about. It's not the Solomon temple, any temple. And when King Herod, this is center here is the actual temple complex where you have the holy place, holy of holies, the altar, and so on. Then you have the court of only the priest can enter there. Then you have the court of the Israelites, then the court of the women, and the court of the Gentile. The court of the Gentile is outside. Okay, so the Gentiles cannot go in. So when we read chapter 21, when Paul, they have seen Trophimus, the Egyptian, in the city. So the people have presumed that Paul has taken this Ephesian, which is a Gentile, into the temple complex. And that was why there was a big riot. Okay, so when King Herod rebuilt this temple, he built this Antonius fortress this is about north east of the whole temple complex. Okay, and here, this is where when the riot started, the commander took Paul into there, keep it, because there's like his military headquarters. And here it said the Roman guard barracks have a house about 500 soldiers. And for the commander, because now Jerusalem is a colony, his job is to maintain order in the city of Jerusalem. In fact, in the city of Jerusalem and the whole Israel. If there's any uprising, any riot, his head may go. So that's why he added very quickly. Okay, I would just like to point out, this is not in our reading today, but it's in the reading tomorrow, the first verse of tomorrow, where the Sanhedrin meets. Okay, tomorrow when verse 30, okay, the commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews. So the next day, I did tomorrow's reading, he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the members of Sanhedrin to assemble. And this one, which is colored red, which he called the Stoic or the royal portico, this is where the Sanhedrin. So Paul, at the end of today's reading, will be put here. Okay, and then the next day, when we are going to read tomorrow, he will be brought to this place where he will be meeting the Sanhedrin. Okay. So this is where it is. This building at the back is part of the Antonian fortress. And that is the steps that go up to the fortress. So when verse 40, Paul stood on the steps, so he's much higher ground, and motioned to the crowd. This is all the crowd people, they say, wanted to charge him. Okay, and so this is the story where it is. We can see he's standing there. He stood, and when they were all silent, because he spoke to their Arabic, everybody knew this Paul is actually a Jew, even though he is born in Tarsus, and he knows our language. So they were willing to listen to him. And he spoke to him, verse 1 of chapter 22. He said, brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. Earlier I mentioned this is the first of Paul's 5 defenses that is recorded in the book of Acts. So you can read it. Acts chapter 21. His first defense was to the Jewish authority. The second defense was when he did the Sanhedrin that we'll be reading tomorrow. Okay, and then the third defense between Felix, which is in chapter 24. The fourth defense is defense between Festus, which is in Acts chapter 25. And the fifth and last defense is in King Agrippa, Acts 26. And that is what Paul said, I appeal to Caesar. And that's when he went to Rome, because Caesar was in Rome. Okay, and then when he started, he said, brothers and fathers. Okay, if you still remember what we read, okay, in Acts chapter 7, where the first martyr, Stephen, was martyred, that was the same phrase he used as his defense, brothers and fathers. That was in Acts chapter 7, verse 2. Okay, if you look a bit further, Acts chapter 8, verse 1, when Paul said there was a young man who was there, went away. And that young man, Bible scholar says, is Paul. So Paul was there when they stoned the first martyr, Stephen. And I think that scene has such a great impression on Paul's mind. So when Paul at this time come to his own defense, he used exactly the same term, brothers and fathers. Okay, then verse 3 onwards, all the way to verse 21 is Paul's defense. Okay, it can roughly be divided into 3 parts. The first part, verse 3 to verse 5, Paul talked about how he was before his conversion. Then the second part is verse 6 to 16. Paul talked about how he was converted. And the third part, verse 17 to 21, when Paul talked about what did he do after his conversion. Okay, it's Isn't that also should be our testimony? Okay, when we teach our young people, the children, and so how to write your testimony. First thing, how was I before I became a Christian? The second question, how did I become a Christian? The third question, what happened to me after I become a Christian? So the 1, 2, 3 years. So there's a good guideline for each of us as we draft up our own God story. So let's look at what Paul has said. His defense here, in a sense, is quite simple because we had talked about it when we did Acts. Okay, so in verse 3, Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. So he was born in Tarsus, but he was brought up this city, Jerusalem. And he said, I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. So Paul, you know what he did? He was actually establishing the contact. And he went back to Gamaliel because he's talking to Jews here. And Gamaliel is one of the most honored of all the Pharisees and all the rabbis. At the same time, everybody knows Gamaliel is an expert in religious law. And also everybody knows, the people there know, Gamaliel is a voice of moderation. Because in Acts chapter 5, he was to say that the council said, well, if this is of God, it will continue. If not of God, it will die. There's a voice of moderation. So first thing we learn is Paul used very effective communication. When he spoke to the crowd, who are ordinary people in the city of Jerusalem, he doesn't use Hebrew. Neither does he use Greek, but he used Aramaic. Okay, then he went on to say, I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the council can themselves testify. See, I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. You know what Paul did? Paul affirmed his accusers, affirmed the people who are accusing. He said, you know, you all are zealous, but I am as zealous for God as you are. So they give us something. When we share Christ with our non-believer, never condemn and say your religion is false. You are definitely going to go there. But he established, like Paul in Athens, he said, I can see that you seek after God. You are as godly as you want. Okay, so that is something we can learn. Let us continue. That was the first part. It said how he was before he Christian. Okay, verse 6. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. And the Lord answered, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. He replied, my companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. Then he said, what shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you'll be told all that you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. Then a man named Ananias came to see me. We read this in earlier Acts chapter 9 and 10 and so on. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living here. See, Paul again affirmed. Okay, earlier when he talked about Gamaliel, he mentioned that he was expert of the law. And here he talked about Ananias. He added in to say that he was a devout observer of the law, connecting with his audience, and he's highly respected. Verse 13, he stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive a sight. And at that very moment, I was able to see him. Verse 14. Then he said, the God of our ancestors has chosen you. This is what Ananias said to Paul. Chosen you, Paul, to know his will, God's will, and to see the righteous one and hear words from his mouth. So Ananias is telling Paul that God has chosen you, and God himself will allow you to see Jesus and to hear words from Jesus on your own eye. Then verse 15, you will be his witnesses to all people of what you have seen and heard. Verse 16, and now what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name. Okay, so some people on verse 16, some people say, oh, does this verse then mean that you must be baptized to be saved? No, it doesn't mean that. But actually, Bible scholars, if you look into the original Greek, New Testament was written in Greek, original Greek, the actual tenses and so actually mean that, well, you have called on his name, Paul, your sins have been washed away, and now you get up and be baptized. Okay, so the actual sequence is Paul is, and as I tell Paul, you have already called on the name of Jesus, and your sins have already washed away because you called on his name. And what must you do now? Get up and be baptized. And so Paul is narrating his conversion experience. Okay, and that is very important. Okay, we study the whole book of Romans. Romans, the first part especially, actually maybe 2/3 of the book, right up to 11. 11 chapters out of 16 chapters talk about doctrine. It is very important, but just as important when we share Christ as doctrine is my personal experience. Nobody can dispute what is my personal experience. And then we go on verse 17. What happened after his conversion? Verse 17, when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, okay, even though Paul has accepted Christ, he is a Jew, he doesn't stop becoming a Jew, the culture. So he went back to Jerusalem. I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, I leave Jerusalem immediately because the people here will not accept a testimony about me. This is what Paul narrated, but he didn't mention this in Acts chapter 9 and 10. Verse 19, he said, Lord, I replied, these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing me. Paul was trying to reason with God, the Lord who was speaking to him, asking him to leave. He said, no, Lord, no, people will respect me because people see what I've done, how drastic I am. But the Lord knows better. Okay, and the Lord said, then the Lord said to me, go, and I will send you away to the Gentiles. And there was where reason Paul left Jerusalem and went. So the three parts of his defense, how he was become before he became Christian, trusted in the Lord, how did he come to know the Lord, and what happened to him after he knew the Lord. Okay, then verse 22. The crowd was very quiet because Paul was speaking Arabic. Everybody silent, listen. But verse 22 said the crowd listened to Paul until he said this. What is this? Where the Lord told him, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Then they raised their voices and shouted, rid the earth of him, he is not fit to live. And they were shouting and throwing off their clothes and flinging dust into the air. Why do you think the people were so angry? Okay, was it because they knew that Paul was preaching to the Gentiles? No, Bible scholars said no. Because when you read the gospel, like Matthew 23, we knew that even Jews will travel far and wide by sea and by land to win a convert. So winning non-Jews, winning non-Gentiles to become Jews is something they all accept. and they all practice. Okay, even Jesus went to talk to the Phoenician women. But what the people were angry with was Paul's teaching. Paul's teaching that Gentiles need not undergo circumcision. Gentiles need not obey the ceremonial laws of the Jews. They can become a Christian right from Gentile become Christian. And that was what they disagree with Paul, and they wanted him, get rid of him. Okay, and so then verse 24, verse 23 says, as they were shouting and throwing off their clothes and flinging dust into the air, the commander ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. That just now we saw into the Antonian for the fortress. Okay, he directed that he be flogged and interrogated in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. The commander wanted to flog him, flog Paul. Okay, verse 24 talk about flog. It is different. When in the Jews, in the Jewish law, they said you can only 40 lashes less one. So a Jew must never be lashed 40 times, only 39. And this is a very long whip where they lash. Okay, Paul is not speaking about that. But if you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 11, 24, he talked Paul at that part. Okay, he talked about 5 times he have received from the Jews. And then Paul, this flogging here is also not talking about rods. Okay, in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he said twice, Paul said twice he had been beaten with rod. This beaten with rod is actually a short stick and they beat. But when you talk about Roman, talk about flogging or the scorching, is the Roman scorch. It is like this is in the temple, one of the churches, I think Church of Sepulchre or something. This is the one, they believe this is what they did to Jesus. It is a big stone, and the person who is supposed to flog is to hack the stone like this with a bare back. And what they use is actually a ladder. It's a short rod with long ladder strips, and tied to the end of the ladder strip were bottles and metals and stone. So can you imagine, on the bare back, when you lash on it, all the metal will actually stretch away the back, the flesh of the person. So a lot of people will die. And this is what the Roman centurion wanted to expand Paul to. Let's continue. Okay, as they stretch him out to flog him, this is what they are doing, to something like this. Paul said to the centurion standing there, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported, what are you going to do now? This man is a Roman citizen. So the commander went to Paul and asked, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? And Paul said, yes, I am. Then the commander answered, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship. So they have found this. So in the time of the time Roman early church, okay, in the time the Emperor Claudius, you can actually buy your citizenship. This is a stage, he said, you have to pay a lot of money to buy the citizenship. And this is what the Roman, what the commander said. Okay, commander said, 130, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship, but Paul replied, but I was born a citizen. So Paul obtained his citizenship because he was born in Tarsus. Okay, so there, if you're born there, you can see, but you can buy, it is a bribery. You can go ahead and buy, pay lots of money. And in Rome, if you obtain your citizenship for bribery by buying, it is like not as authentic. It's like second class. Whereas you are born a citizen, you are like first class. Okay, and what is the verse 29? Those who were about to interrogate him withdrew immediately. the commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. Because a Roman citizen has certain rights. Under the Roman law, you are not supposed to fetter. That means you are not supposed to put a Roman citizen in chains. And you are not supposed to punish a Roman citizen before a fair trial has been followed. So in this case, Paul never had proper trial. Paul has been chained, and so the commander was worried. Okay, the commander was worried because he had done something wrong. Okay, and so that's why he went on to say that the next day he was taken back to the garrison. Okay, so this is what happened. So what on this narrative, there are something we can pick up, some lessons we can learn. Firstly, following Paul, how he shared his gospel, how he shared gospel with people, how he put his defense. First, he established an effective communication. So he spoke to people in Aramaic instead of Greek or Hebrew. Okay, so he speak to a language and connect with them. But sometimes what we call a hard language. So that was also partly the reason why the Bible need to be translated in the languages, hard language of people. Secondly, he affirmed non-believers. In our sharing gospel with our non-believing friends, we have to affirm them rather than accuse them or speak degradingly or condemn them. Okay, thirdly, Paul used his credential wisely. So he said, no, I'm educated as under Gamaliel and a nice. So it's okay to establish a context. For example, if you are talking to your son's tuition teachers, you can use that credential. You can use that connection. Okay, so our relationship with our non-believing friend always find connecting point, that our credential where we can connect with them. So our sharing become more meaningful. Fourthly, is personal testimony. Paul uses personal testimony. And fifthly, the last part, Paul knew what was his right, and he stood up for his right. Okay, I just spend a little bit of time. Even as Malaysians or wherever we are, we have to know our rights. Our federal constitution states that all Malaysians have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of worship, freedom to practice and propagate our religion. And those are our rights. And even though as a minority in the nation, we have to stand up to our right and not let the majority deprive us of our right. And some other, we have a right to property. We have a right to education of all. So as we need to know our right, and we need to stand up for our right, I just want to add on to this. Not only do we need to stand up for our personal right, and I think as the church, as believers, we need to stand up for the right of others less privileged ones. For example, World Vision every year will run for the children. United Nations Human Rights, 42 rights of the children. So that's why the run for the children rights, we are supposed to run not 42 miles, 42 minutes or something. So we have to stand up. Okay, like what is very hot in our situation, the rights of our rights of our refugees. Even though they are refugees, they have certain rights in this nation. And as church, we need to stand up for their right. And the latest is the right of the children, Malaysian women who have children, they are born overseas to Malaysian mom, should be eligible for citizenship. At the moment, the citizenship only automatic, it is born to the father is a Malaysian. But there was a landmark court case to say that even if you are Malaysian women, if our children were born overseas, they should have automatic right of citizenship. I think this morning, Hannah, you had a gathering. The government government wanted to appeal to overturn that landmark decision. And our good Hannah Yeo, she was with the ladies this morning. I saw the live video, and each woman talked about it. They said, I was overseas. I came back to Malaysia. Okay, but my 3 children, they are born overseas. Even after 10 years, they cannot be Malaysian citizen, and we need to do this. Okay, so these are just some thoughts. What do we do? How do I share the gospel? And as a church, as believers, do I stand up for our rights as Malaysians? And on top, a step further, do we stand up and speak up for the rights of other people, whether here or elsewhere, when their rights were trashed upon? So that is, I think, a social responsibility that we need to have. So that's my short sharing for today, some thoughts and reflection. So thank you very much for listening. God bless you all.